All right, let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. And it is my pleasure and honor to reintroduce our guest who gave such a fantastic talk yesterday here in this room. And Professor Serhiy Plokhy, the Mikhailo Khrushchevsky Professor for Ukrainian History and the Director of the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University. As I quipped yesterday, his biography is really too long and so many accolades to have one seminar. I will be very brief. He is the leading authority on Ukrainian history and policy and current events in the world right now. We are all now trained on his books on Ukrainian history, whether it is the gates of Europe or the history of the Cold War or the collapse of the Soviet Union with the masterful last empire. And as we joke, he produced doorstop books that you need some muscles to lift, but you cannot put them down because they are so readable, accessible, and the ability to convey complex issues in the most accessible way is a fantastic talent that so many of us historians simply envy of Professor Plokhy. And yesterday he talked about the war in the Ukraine from a historian's point of view. Today he will talk about Chernobyl roulette, war in the nuclear zone, something that is literally at the core of our interest as we speak. Please join me in welcoming Professor Serhiy Plokhy.
Thank you for this introduction and welcome back those who had a chance to attend my talk yesterday and had a discussion. And I probably start the lecture with describing the way how I woke up today. So I reached to my iPhone as usual and went into my emails, and at the top there was an email from a colleague in Europe with very short notice saying that, okay, the Russians hit the Chernobyl sarcophagus. And I thought, well, I wrote a book on the Russian occupation of Chernobyl in 2022. That was one of people who works in the energy sector who helped me and advised me. And I thought, okay, it looks like they discovered that something after 2022 that there was still a damage. And that was my interpretation of what happened. And then I went into the news, and the news was that the drone this last night hit the sarcophagus of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So the story of Chernobyl and war and atoms for peace at the time of war actually continues and continues today. We don't know how it will turn out. The radiation levels are in norm, but clearly this is done in the so public way. There is a challenge. There is a direct attack on the nuclear side. So one more confirmation that while the world and all of us are concerned about the war in Ukraine going nuclear by the use of the tactical weapons or other things, it's actually went nuclear already on the very first day of the all-out Russian aggression against Ukraine on 24th of February 2022, because it was during the first day of the invasion that the Russians took over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So that is the story that I'm telling in my book, and that's what my lecture will be focused on. I don't know why, but it doesn't Maybe I'm pressing wrong buttons. Okay, thank you. I will start with basically continuing a little bit a theme and topic about historian at the time of the war and the craft of a historian at the time of the war that I started yesterday. For those of you who were here, the theme is familiar. And back then I said that actually what I did with my previous book, The Russo-Ukrainian War, was generally what historians probably are better not doing, this before they get tenure. Because it's writing on the contemporary subjects, it's not exactly what we are trained to do or expect to do or maybe have the right qualifications. But I wrote that book putting the war that started in 2022 in a broader historical perspective. So there were some elements of history writing that were well established, considered to be legitimate by the field. What I was doing here was basically a very, I wasn't punished for writing the earlier book, so I decided to continue on this very tricky path of writing on contemporary developments, because what I describe in that book is the story of maybe really recent, there is very little prehistory in the book, and it is 5 weeks of the war, the first 5 weeks of the war. What happened was that the Russian internal troops, the Rosgvardia, that were also coming with the tanks and were also coming with the Spetsnaz, the special operations units. They approached the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, took over the plant, and kept it until the late March of 2022, until the successful counteroffensive from Kiev of the Ukrainian forces made the Russian position in the area untenable, and they had to leave to avoid the encirclement. There was altogether around 300 Ukrainian personnel at the plant. Half of them roughly were the members of the Ukrainian National Guard, whose task was to protect the plant, but protect against the stalkers, protect against possible terrorist attack, but not the army with the tanks and with aviation and artillery and so on and so forth. And then there were roughly 80 plus minus people of the shift of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, because this is the site that needs monitoring, including the sarcophagus that was hit earlier today, a number of reactors that were shut down, but there is a nuclear spent nuclear fuel, the assemblies that are still sitting in the cooling pond that need attention. So this is very much the story that I'm discussing in the book. This is the American cover of the American edition. This is of the British one. This is the story that is discussed in the book. I got quite lucky getting access to the very interesting primary sources. There is a reckoning project in Ukraine. I didn't know that at the time. Now I realized that it was at least partially funded by the USAID. So I don't know what is happening with the funding now. But what they were doing, or at least part of what they were doing, they were actually working with the Ukrainian Attorney General's, the General Prosecutor's Office. moving into the territories that were liberated by Ukrainian forces in 2022, in north of Ukraine, in Chernobyl, but also in east and in the south, and recording or collecting evidence for the Russian war crimes, and also interviewing people who were under occupation. One segment of what they were doing, they went to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and were interviewing the personnel there, and also people who were not at the plant, but at the nearby city of Chernobyl. So many of them were basically illegal settlers there, who had very difficult relations with the Ukrainian police and with the Ukrainian state, who wanted them out of there. And it's very interesting what also they were saying. This evidence that was coming from that project was the base, or at least important part of what I was writing about. The rest was also coming from different sources. My biggest problem was that I had a lot of sources dealing with coming from the Ukrainian side, but there was a lack of sources on the Russian side. I tried my best to collect everything that I could, and a lot of that was, given the importance of Chernobyl in general, there was a number of Russian reporters, but also TV crews that were going to Chernobyl during the time of the occupation. So I was working with those materials. And then, in a very bizarre manner, the two commanding officers of the Russian forces, the one general and another colonel, were awarded with the Golden Star of the Hero of Russia for allegedly saving the world from another Chernobyl disaster by actually taking over the nuclear power plant. They were, at least one of them, the name of one of them, general, was never mentioned at all. But the junior officer, or relatively junior, the colonel, became kind of also a media star in Russia. So he would be going on the TV shows and would answer questions and so on and so forth. So that was helpful, again, trying to reconstruct the Russian narrative, trying to reconstruct also story from the Russian side, but also check, looking at what that particular officer was saying, check whether what I was getting from the Ukrainian side was correct information, whether those people didn't try to present themselves to be more heroic, more patriotic than they actually were. The name of the colonel, and that's the Colonel Frodenkov, in one of the interviews he said that the foreman of the Ukrainian shift was an absolutely awful guy, that he was threatening him with the blowing up the nuclear power plant if the Russian troops wouldn't stop the warfare or something like that. And it sounded quite improbable for me in the conditions of the complete Russian control over the nuclear power plant that someone on the Ukrainian side would tell that into the face of the Russian officer. And then I went to the Reckoning Project materials, looking at the interview of that particular foreman of the shift. Just a sec, where is he? Okay, here is Valentin Heiko, and it is there. The conversation, the conversation actually took place. That's how I worked with the sources, and there were of course challenges. When you write about the contemporary developments about the war, it's not just there is lack of materials. You can't go to the archive. There is also a situation in which both sides in the war create information and narrative which are basically false, with the specific goal of misleading, confusing the other side, confusing the actors. So it's not only that you deal with the situation where there is a lack of sources, but the sources that are being produced are sometimes specifically produced as misinformation. I'll give you one example that closer to the end of the occupation of Chernobyl, news started to appear about the Russian personnel at the nuclear power plant getting violently sick because of the radiation poisoning. Going to Belarus, to the hospitals, that people were admitted there, and so on and so forth. It turned out to be actually work of Ukrainian intelligence services, trying to somehow affect the morale and the behavior of the Russian occupational forces. And then I talked later, I was in Kiev, talked to some of the people who worked in Chernobyl and who appeared on TV at that time, and they confirmed to me that really they realized what was going on. They tried to support, being Ukrainian patriots, to support this narrative without actually saying outright false things, given that they were professionals and didn't know but guessed what was going on. So this is another example of the challenges that come with writing on things that are very fresh, that are very, contemporary, happening in front of your eyes. Another thing that causes anxiety for any historian is that you write. You're the first one who is actually writing about a particular development. So there is no Nestor the chronicler before you. So even chronology is not clear. The selection of the facts which are important and which are not there at all. And there is no historiography before that. We are trying to go and to look at historiography, to identify the problem with that historiography, and then try to at least to say, okay, things are more complicated, or maybe propose an alternative reading of a particular phenomenon. But there is nothing. There is desert. You're the first one who is walking through that. There are no paths. There is no way out, just proving how wrong the other guy was and how smart you are because you found a different path. There is no path. It's very again creates anxiety for someone who spent a lot of time working through the historiography, teaching students of how to deal with that, and also writing yourself. But there was also a silver lining in this work, and it comes to the sources and it comes to the material. So there are all these limitations that I just talked about, but there are also absolutely fantastic new things that I didn't fully realize that they existed in terms of the source material. And that source material is social media, the Facebook pages, the Twitter, other things. We as historians could only dream about the material of that sort coming from 10, 15, 20 years ago, to say nothing about 19th century, 17th century. We try to reconstruct what is happening in the mind of people. We have very limited sources of how to actually find that, how to establish that. We are really very, very happy when we found, there would be a memoir. Okay, memoir would somehow put the materials that we found in the archives in the context of human relations, provide some sort of background. But memoirs are written 10, 15, 50 years after the events. Some of us can get lucky and get a diary. Wow, diary, it's really cool. That person writes almost in real time what is happening there. Well, for those of you who keep diaries, you know that you don't do that on the daily basis. Even if at the end of the day you decided to write down what happened today, you already create a narrative. You already try to place things in a particular way, in a particular structure. This doesn't happen in the same way with the tweet. Tweet or reaction on the Facebook, it's an immediate reaction. And we are very often frustrated how much garbage is out there. To what degree people really don't think before they put words and type them. But wow, this is bonanza. This is just El Dorado for a historian. That's the emotional response in time. This is not trying to forget things that you're not particularly proud about and somehow to write about things of how great you were, what right thoughts you had at that moment. That's a unique, absolutely unique source of material. I'll give you just one example that I have in the book. So there is attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, March 5th, it seems to me, of 2022. As you see, I'm already using Fox News. I didn't know at the time how timely it would be, but it is there. So the situation there was quite interesting. So the Russians are actually waging battle over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The Ukrainian National Guard, the guys that belong to the same to the same sort of forces that in Chernobyl laid down weapons, in Zaporizhzhia a few days later they already knew what happened to those in Chernobyl. They were taken prisoners. In Zaporizhzhia, they're fighting back. One of the engineers puts the feed that comes from the surveillance cameras at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It puts actually on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant YouTube channel. So the entire world watches in real time the war on Europe's largest nuclear power plant. And there is a website again, there is a number of organizations in Ukraine dealing with nuclear issues. One of them is the website of the regulator of the nuclear industry, the guys who are in direct touch, in direct contact with the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. And they post the news, but also people come there and leave their comments. Normal people don't go to that website, or they don't know that website exists. Who goes there? Go people actually who are part of the nuclear industry. That's their home. Normally, whatever issues are there, they would be there. A lot of them at least are highly qualified engineers, scientists. They would actually share some opinion. Okay, this is good, this is bad, that should be fixed in this way or another. And you read comments as they watch what is happening there. The impression for up to half an hour that basically these are not scientists. There is no scientific advice. What you see there is actually, Mother of God save us. The discourse changes. It is religious discourse. They ran out of any ideas and any other emotions except that, okay, the end of the world is coming. I quote those things in the book, But if you would talk to all of them, or most of them at the end of the day, not 10 years from now, and say how they reacted and what they thought, knowing how it turned out, that eventually there was a fire, but nothing exploded, radiation levels stayed under norm, in control. None of them would actually thought that they would be hiding those emotions. They would be erased. They wouldn't remember them. So working for a historian, working with the materials, the sources that are coming from today, there are huge challenges. Again, there is no historiography. There are limited sources. There are sources specifically produced in the conditions of the war as deliberate disinformation. But there is also this element called social media that allows us actually to do things that we couldn't do when we were writing about 70s, 50s, of the previous century or the century before that, and so on and so forth. So now, after being done with methodology, let me talk about the story itself, but also my discoveries as a historian. This is one of the scenes from the award-winning HBO Sky miniseries on Chernobyl. That is about 1986. And also the subject that I worked on before that, I have a book on Chernobyl disaster in 1986. And what I found actually when I was working now on Chernobyl in 2022, certain things that there was a lot of continuity, and then there were differences as well. And the continuity mostly was related to the story of 1986 and the Russian behavior in 2022 in Chernobyl. I'll be more specific on that. So one thing that was a major contributing factor to what happened at Chernobyl was the atmosphere of general secrecy, withholding information from the people who really were in charge of performing a particular operation. There was a very powerful role was played by propaganda in 1986. For example, the idea, no one at Chernobyl in 86 could imagine that reactors can explode. The reactors exploded in the capitalist world. They couldn't explode under socialism. Sounds crazy. It is crazy. We know that Chernobyl exploded, but that was part of kind of a deep-seated, ingrained belief. And again, the propaganda in that way was providing space, allowing for the violations of the norms of the protocols and so on and so forth. And then another big theme that would come back in 2022, this is the theme about the disregard for human safety and human life. And the Chernobyl was dealt with the Soviet army at that time mobilizing 600,000 people, throwing them into the zone. They would be living in open fields quite often, in the areas that the maps, irradiation maps, were not completed at that time. They didn't know whether they lived in contaminated areas or not. If you need to perform a particular task, there would be biorobots, which would be soldiers of 18, 19, 20 years old who would be sent into the most dangerous places. That was the story of 1986, and it would continue in 1987. In 2022, and I will discuss about. I will return to the themes of secrecy, propaganda, and disregard for human life. The disregard really started with the very idea of attacking Kiev by sending heavy equipment and military formations from the territory of Belarus to Kiev to take over the Ukrainian capital. The hours after the invasion started, this is the map, the contamination map of the region. Just a little bit more information on that. The Chernobyl nuclear exclusion zone is known as 30-kilometer zone. They started with 10 kilometers, then a few days after the accident they extended it to 30 kilometers, but they didn't have the maps. That was basic idea. As of today, the Chernobyl nuclear zone is like that. It's not 30 kilometers, it's a weird one. But again, it's not more rational than 10-kilometer zone or 30-kilometer zone, because if you look at the actual contamination, the darker place is, the more radiation is there. There is no direct correlation between the 10-kilometer exclusion zone, 30-kilometer exclusion zone, the new exclusion zone, and the radiation. So the radiation, one way or another, is high, and it's actually equally high also on the Belarusian part of the on the Belarusian side of the border. So when the Russian troops moved into the area, the equipment that was measuring levels of radiation went crazy. The radiation levels were going up to 10 times as high as it was normal. All that information was also automatically transferred to the Vienna, to the headquarters of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and there was immediate concern that something terrible happened in the zone. So what happened was that it's a contaminated area. You move troops, you move heavy equipment through that zone. The dust, the sand goes up into the air, and it is dirty. It is dirty in the sense that it is contaminated. So anyone who would think or consider health repercussions for your own military, whatever the goal is, whatever the reason attacking Kyiv or any other place, would probably not send the troops through the site of the worst nuclear disaster in the world. But that certainly was not concerned on the Russian side. So this is General Burakov, a senior official in the National Guards in Moscow, who was sent to command the operation, received the order of the Star of the Hero of Russia for saving the world from another Chernobyl, but never became a public personality. His name is not mentioned in any of the official statements. Reasons is not entirely known for me, but he was a representative of Moscow, of central headquarters. The Colonel Ferlinkov, whom I already mentioned, who became that public personality, was a commander of the Russian Rosgvardia, the internal troops unit in the city of Bryansk, it seems to me. So one of these neighboring cities on the Russian side of the border. Ferlinkov later admitted that he and his people were exercising how actually, and had, went through some training of how to take a Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Ironically, they had their drills at the Kursk nuclear power plant, where in the last half of a year, Ukrainian troops moved relatively close to the Kursk nuclear power plant. Because Kursk and Chernobyl were basically the layout of the station was roughly more or less the same. They were using the same reactors. The problem was that Frelikov and his people, they knew how to penetrate the perimeter, how to take over control over the access gates, control over the station. But no one, and that's the question of the information and sharing of the information, no one ever told them that the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was not an operational nuclear power plant. Frelikov, appearing on the Russian TV already after the Russian withdrawal, would actually say that the reactors were operational, and he believed what the Ukrainians were telling him, that they can actually blow up those reactors if he didn't behave. A lot of people who came with Frelikov belonging to different Russian units, they really didn't know where they were going. Certainly they didn't have any protective gear. And only after the Ukrainian foreman actually threatened Frelikov and that happened after Putin made an announcement about hinting that there can be a possible use of nuclear weapons. The Ukrainian foreman said, okay, then we have nothing to lose. Either you tell Moscow to stop that, or we will blow this up. We will not leave, but you will not leave this place either. So only after that they actually started to bring into the region the so-called experts. And this is on the right, and here he is caught by the camera, security camera at the nuclear power plant. Is Nikolai Miluhin, the deputy director in charge of the security of one of the units of the Rosatom, who came and was parachuted to the Chernobyl nuclear plant together with a number of experts, Russian experts from Rosatom. They walked the station, and then they realized, it was already the second week into the occupation, that they didn't know what to do with that station. Chernobyl is quite unique. For 30 years plus after the explosion, after the accident, there was a number of works that were done, including the construction of this new sarcophagus over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The equipment that Russians actually are not familiar with, that was a project where Ukrainians participated with French, with Europeans and others. So that was sort of a technology that the experts from the Rosatom didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how it operated. What that meant was that following their own understanding of what was happening, the protocols that they had, the Russians started to fortify the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in case the Ukrainians actually would launch an attack, and started to dig trenches in the area adjacent to, on the verge of the place called Red Forest, the most contaminated area in the zone and probably the most contaminated area in the world. When I was writing about that, I don't remember anymore whether it stayed in the book or not, but I wrote something like that. It's like they never watched the Chernobyl miniseries. Everyone knew that Red Forest, it's a dangerous place. And my editor told me, okay, that's not how you write that doesn't work with the rest of the book. So I don't remember whether I managed to keep it in the book or it was removed, but that was my reaction of basically the level of unpreparedness and also the level of disregard for the life of your and health of your own people, of your soldiers. That's where there was a lot of continuation with Chernobyl 1986. And what was added, which was not part of 1986, is actually Lutin. It's Lutin. Lutin of everything. That's part of the Russian story of occupation in general. That was very much part of the story of Chernobyl. That's one of the labs. The computers, equipment, hard drives, everything was removed. Another thing that I don't think from what I studied was to such a degree part of the Chernobyl story in 1986 is drinking. The Ukrainian witnesses say that close to 1/3 of all garbage that was removed from the places where the Russian soldiers were empty bottles. The looting was also connected to drinking, because the search was for something that can be taken and not necessarily taken to Belarus, despite the fact that a lot of that was, and it had a GPS marker so it could be followed all the way to Belarus, but a lot was actually to sell it and to get alcohol. Now about the Ukrainians. I'm Ukrainian myself. I'm certainly very biased in terms of thinking about my own country and my own people. But I didn't expect the Ukrainian personnel of the station behaving with that level of dignity and sort of a subtle patriotism, as the sources indicated. Not only the interviews conducted by Rekonin Project, other journalists, but also what I was able to get on the Russian side. So this is Valentin Heiko. He marked, by the way, 60th anniversary while in captivity at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. A very soft-spoken guy. You look at him, because I didn't meet him in person. I watched a lot of video interviews with him. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but you will understand what I mean. Looks like just a computer geek. So very, very quiet, soft-spoken, but it turned out that the guy had real guts. So he was. The conversations that he started with the Russian general and the Russian colonel was, okay, I'm a representative of Ukraine here. Who are you? What are you doing here? He said, well, we are securing this plant from the possible attack from the Ukrainian nationalists and Banderites. And he said, who are Banderites? Do you have a definition who Banderite is? They looked at each other and said, no. We don't have that. He said, okay, then you can start with arresting me. He was really very important in the way how the rest of the personnel really then reacted and acted, but he was also part of there was nothing particularly unique in his reaction to the reaction of the majority of people at the plant. Which was also a little bit surprising to me, because these guys, they came from the city called Slavutich. The city of Slavutich was a city that was built after the Chernobyl disaster of 1986. I don't remember now, but roughly 60 or 70 kilometers from the plant in the relatively safe area They would come by train, cross Dnieper River, cross part of the Belarusian territory. So that was the plant where the operators of the plant were moved from Pripyat, that became a ghost town and was destroyed. And also those, the so-called liquidators, the people who dealt with the consequences of the accident, moved. Slavutich is probably today, and was certainly back then, the youngest city in Ukraine in terms of the time when it was founded. But it was also probably the most international city. The Soviet Union was still there in 1986. The effort to deal with the Chernobyl disaster was all Union. The nuclear industry in the Soviet Union started very much as Russian undertaking. The training places and institutions, eventually they moved to Ukraine as well, but those people would be trained in Moscow. So if you want to think about imperial, about international city, that would be Slavutich. To a degree also that would be Enerhodar at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The city would until the year 2020, would vote, the majority in the city council would be the supporters of Viktor Yanukovych Party of Regions. So a lot of people there come from Russia, or at least their family roots are in Russia. The guy, let me see whether I have him here or not. No. The guy who served as a go-between between the Russian occupational forces and the Ukrainian personnel was born in Volga region. Well, the commander now of the Ukrainian forces also was born in Russia, General Syrsky. So born in Volga region, came as a teenager in '87 when his parents moved from somewhere in Russia to deal with the disaster. And you listen to him, it's that the language is very funny. So he speaks Russian, but a very particular Russian, where you can feel some notes and some elements of Volga dialects, but also some not actually standard Ukrainian dialects from the region. So even in his language, he was a perfect go-between. And again, he was not the only one with roots in Russia, some knowledge of Ukrainian, but not perfect. So all these people of different backgrounds in this war between a much more powerful Russia and much weaker Ukraine decided to stay on the side of Ukraine. They were in uncharted waters. How do you behave when you are running a nuclear power plant and tanks are showing up there? What is patriotic and what is not patriotic to do under the circumstances? Is it good to fight back and endanger the possible safety of the nuclear power plant and create potential new accident? Or you lay down weapons and save not just yourself, but also your families and the world from another disaster? The Ukrainian National Guardsmen responded to that question in different ways. Fought in Zaporizhzhia, didn't fight in Chernobyl. But the problem is that actually there is no protocols. Or what do you do at the time of the war? No nuclear power plant was built with the idea to be a perfect battleground for conventional warfare. What is loyalty and what is betrayal is not clear. It's just a lot of gray areas. It's like with the mayors in the cities that were taken over by the Russian army. Do you mobilize resistance? Do you leave when the Russians are moving in, abandoning the people who elected you? Or you stay with them and try to somehow help those people, but then you become potentially a target for accusations that you are a traitor. So those people were making these decisions on the spot. There is no clear-cut things, no instructions, no clarity coming from nowhere. And they are pretty much cut. They're already in the rear of the Russian army advancing toward Kiev. There is no models, there is no books, there is no films. I hope there will be film about that and the choices that they made. And they decided what was right and what was wrong on their own. For Valentin Heiko, the real hero of the entire saga, he considered betrayal to be a situation where someone would actually leave the shift and go back to his family in Slavodich. So betrayal of group there and the mission that they had. And the guy who betrayed Heiko was actually marching through the forests with the war going on for 60 or 70 kilometers, having more chances actually surviving at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant than taking this walk back home. So the decision that they eventually made was okay to stay at the station, but they told the Russians that either you follow our rules, which are the rules of the International Atomic Energy, or you will be all dead. And that worked. So the kidnapped really turned tables on the kidnappers, using their knowledge of the plant and also bluffing on more than one occasion, and sometimes also trolling the occupiers. The stories that they tell are very, very interesting. This woman, Lyudmila Kozak, by the way, the conditions in which these people lived are just... Imagine you come to work, you share an office with somebody, there would be 2 or 3 people, and that would be also for the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the place where you work 24/7, you were supposed to work for 12 hours, and there would be shift change after that. There is no shift change. So you sleep, you eat, and you work in these conditions. So what the standard procedure during the Russian occupation was that the authorities were demanding to wear the white armbands. There is a story near Chernobyl where a woman of Jewish background, when she heard about that, she had a particular reaction to those demands. So this woman, Lyudmila Kozak, she refused to wear the armband. So that was also a form of protest. And eventually the Russians stopped her and said, okay, look, if you don't do that, during the night we actually would take you for somebody else and we can shoot you. She said, okay. So she went to the Russian commander, the general, and told him, okay, would it be okay if I would be wearing a white cap or hat or whatever they have there as part of that? She said, yeah, that would be okay. So she then got some threads from her scarf and blue and yellow and embroidered the Ukrainian coat of arms there. Another 2 guys were entertaining themselves in a different way. So they would be passing the Russian sentry and saying quite loudly to one to another, saying, do you still have the pills that we have to take to be safe from the radiation? And the other guy would say, no, I ran out of that. And the other guy would say, well, then we are screwed. And would pass by. Of course, the Russian soldier never was getting any pills. So there was this form of resistance, but eventually the situation was getting more and more tense, and on the Ukrainian side in particular, people were really getting really on the edge, verbally attacking or getting in some sort of verbal quarrel with the Russian soldiers. So the accident was actually in the making, and eventually the Heiko was talking to the Russian commanders, and they decided that they would arrange the exchange, that the new shift would come and replace from Slavutic and would replace the shift that was there. That's the road that they took, with the bridge that during the war was destroyed across the Dnipro River, with going through the Belarusian territory when the railway was there, when the city was built. Of course, there was all Soviet Union. It didn't matter whether there were 20 or 30 kilometers of Belarusian territory. Now it all became borders. And that chapter on the people who came from Slavutic to replace the shift, they published it in Washington Post, and they added some illustrations, and the artists agreed to share them with me. These are working sketches. They turned it into color pictures. That's about them going through in the boats, going on the Ukrainian side of the river. Eventually to the city of Slavutic that was cut off electricity. And what helped them was that in the city of Slavutic, when they built it, it was still the Soviet Union. There were an effort of a number of republics to build different quarters. And it seems to me there was a Georgian quarter with Mongols that were built there, and without electricity, Mongols became the way how people were hitting stuff and feeding themselves. Heiko believed that he and members of the first shift that stayed the longest were not really heroes, that they just got unlucky, that they had to do what they had to do. They came for a shift for 12 hours and they stayed for more than 3 weeks. But the people from Slavutic who decided actually to go into this and put themselves in the hostage type of situation, they were the real heroes because they knew what they were doing. And the reasons were also very interesting, how people were making these decisions. Someone was going actually to replace his next door neighbor, his friend. One woman volunteered to go and work at the kitchen because her husband and her son were part of the Ukrainian National Guard, and they were at the station, and she wanted to be with them. When they asked who would volunteer, actually there were more volunteers that they could accommodate. And they had chosen not one foreman, but 2 foremen, because there was a lot of work to lead that. But they had chosen the guys who were in their 50s and 60s. And the reason was absolutely clear to everyone. Those guys had already grown up children. So if anything happened to them, their children were okay. The younger guys had actually smaller children. So the administration decided that actually they're not fit to go and to take that position. The Ukrainian army returned to the region on March 31st, it seems to me, or 30th, which sort of a happy end story to all of that. But the whole Chernobyl story, apart of being a story about war in Ukraine, about the continuation of the certain trends in Russia, in the Russian army that certainly are there with 1986, and this heroism of Ukrainian personnel. There is a bigger also story for the actually rest of the world. And this is the first time that, in case of Zaporizhia, the battle was taking place at the nuclear site. The first time in the history of the world that the nuclear site was taken over by the Russian army, or any army at all. Today, again, once it is confirmed that it is a Russian drone that hit the sarcophagus, that would be the first clear-cut case of deliberate attack on the nuclear power plant. So what do we do about that? Those guys in Chernobyl, they were making their decisions on the fly, whether they were right or they were wrong. They didn't get much help from anywhere. The Ukrainian government, obviously, again, that's the situation of the war. The help arrived with the troops that arrived. But this is the guy on the Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. I hear that he also has hopes of becoming the head of the United Nations. He's personally a courageous man. He traveled to Zaporizhia under the Russian occupation a number of times. But he represented an organization that has been completely helpless to do anything. This is Grossi visiting the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and looking at the hull that was produced by either artillery shell or the drone that came, Russians are saying came from the Ukrainian side, Ukrainians saying this came from the Russian side. For 2 weeks after the takeover of Chernobyl, Grossi and International Atomic Energy Agency were issuing statements. In none of those statements the word Russia was mentioned. It's like those letters actually didn't exist on the keyboard. Calling on both sides to exercise caution. Of course, there was a lot of an explosion of unhappiness on the Ukrainian websites. I was about myself, and then I checked statements made by other UN bodies. They don't name names. Their career, past, future, depends on the support of the donors of the organization, members of organization. This is UN. Russia is the member of the Security Council. Grossi also didn't act because acting under the conditions of the war is not mandate of the International Atomic Energy Agency. One has to be thankful that they were doing anything at all, because there is no legal foundation and body of laws that would actually regulate a situation like that. If you would go for the legal documents that exist today, it would be not just difficult, it would be impossible to prove that Russians did anything wrong by taking either Chernobyl or Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. It is prohibited to attack nuclear power plants, but the section of the document, which is additional protocol to the Geneva Convention, puts the nuclear power plants together with the hydroelectric power stations, dams, and dikes. There is no separate treatment of all of that. And it says that under the circumstances, if you consider that the risk is low, but the other side is using that for its own purposes, it's okay to take over the nuclear power plant. It was, that's where we were in 2022, that's where we are in 2025, there is no change there. So we as the world community as a whole, were completely not prepared to deal with the situation like that. We are not prepared to deal with that now. And it's not just Grossi that looks into this abyss. It's the embodiment of the world as a whole. Because whatever I heard about the war in Ukraine, the Russo-Ukrainian war, one thing I didn't hear, that this is actually the war to end all wars, that there will be no wars after that. But what I heard a lot in different contexts is that, okay, we are on the verge of the revival of the nuclear industry. There will be modular reactors in every apartment. The construction is going on, and we are trying to save the world from the climate change. We don't address the issue of how to protect the existing 440 nuclear power plants. And then the irony of the situation was absolutely obvious last year, in the summer of 2024, when the Ukrainians started operations in the Kursk region, in the vicinity of the Kursk nuclear power plant. The Russians started to use the same language that the Ukrainians were using addressing the International Atomic Energy Agency. You are useless. What Grossi does, he issues statement appealing to the caution on both sides, visits Moscow. I don't know whether he goes to Kursk or not. He still doesn't have any mandate whether it's Ukraine attacks Russia or its Ukrainian troops are moving closer to the Kursk region. It's a relatively short book that I'm describing you here, but there are a lot of layers apart from war itself, apart from the story that is there, apart from attempts to understand better Russia and the Russian army and what it is and how it functions, and try to understand the changes that happened in the Ukrainian society. There is also this layer about what is next globally for all of us, because Chernobyl, it's once again is a warning, and as today's another attack on the Chernobyl sarcophagus shows, we don't pay attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll take questions. Danny.
Yeah, so I'm curious how, and I guess if the Ukrainian government changed their behavior, their plans after the Chernobyl occupation, if that changed anything with the Ukrainian government, or they just kind of stayed with what they were doing beforehand?
You're talking about the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian army.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was actually no change of any sort. The priority was to defend Kyiv, and then after Kyiv they started to move further. There was change on the Russian side in the sense that they came. Those were not exaggerations that we read at the start of the war. They were planning, and everyone expected that the war would not go for more than a few days. So the good part of Russian Guard that arrived at Chernobyl, there were tanks and there were the special units that were trained how to take over nuclear power plants. But the majority of the troops were Russian Guards who came with shields. And they were telling the Ukrainians there, the Ukrainians then gave it in the interviews, that, well, actually, this is a stopover on the road to Kyiv. We'll go there, we will actually control the crowds, we'll bring your president out, he'll sign whatever is needed to be signed, and we are out, we would leave. So that was original attitude. And then they couldn't believe what was happening around Kyiv, the news that were coming about casualties among Russian troops. And eventually they realized the benefit of the nuclear power plant as a safe zone. So at one point there were 5 generals at Chernobyl, because the idea was that Ukrainians, of course, would not be shooting at the nuclear power plant. So that was change on the Russian side in the sense of, okay, what to do with Chernobyl, how to treat it. They didn't know what it was, then they learned. On the Ukrainian side, again, I have a lot of information, but none of that suggests that actually there was change in the thinking, except that they were not shooting at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant.
Let me ask you. Yesterday we asked the question why the Russians behave on the ground, the Russian army, and to continue this question, to extrapolate now to the nuclear zone. You seem to opt in the direction of recklessness, that they really don't give a damn. But is it at the beginning, the initial occupation of Chernobyl and the conduct, is it stupidity and lack of awareness, or is it out of a strategy? We are mad, we are going to the brink, we're crazy, don't mess with us, because we don't give a damn if it's nuclear, if it's radioactive, etc. I understand it's very difficult because we don't have access to the decision makers in the Kremlin, but based on your research now, not to extrapolate back from what we know today that they attacked?
There is a combination. Just sending troops to the Chernobyl nuclear zone it is recklessness. It was considered to be what a brilliant solution. No one expects us there. We will march to Kiev. Beyond that, once there are troops near Kiev, that's a sort of, at least my understanding, I'm not in military, but this is a standard procedure for any army. You take sort of control over potentially some complexes that are considered to be either strategic or potentially they can be a threat. So when they were saying, okay, we are here to protect from the Banderites, the language was weird, but in terms of, okay, take under control by the occupying army something that is in the rear is not a particularly new or particularly bizarre. With the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, I said that in Chernobyl they finally, on some level, realized what it was, then discovered this benefit of being a safe zone. In Zaporizhzhia, the same was happening, but also then that was a big asset to take over it. So this is a plant in Zaporizhzhia that produces a lot of electricity, six reactors. So it's a lot of real estate that, again, if a soldier is looting somewhere to get a drink, the state is looting in a bigger way.
Yes.
Thank you for another excellent talk. I'm wondering what's your stance as an academic, but also maybe as human, on why some people in different situations happily embrace violence, tortures, and so on, and then other people would respond, if you want, with dignity, with staying there rather than surrendering and leaving their country and so on. So why is it so? Is it, I don't know, because of how the establishment behaved, Ukrainian establishment behaved at the beginning especially? Is it because of the successful national narrative which actually works and makes people stay there and defend their country? So why did it work out, whether in Chernobyl or...
Thank you. Yeah, I'll give you my understanding and a couple of guesses, because this is really a question. Yeah, this is about my pay grade. As a historian, I'm already kind of pushing the limits, but this is really for sociologists, political scientists. But one thing is that what happened at Chernobyl, on the one hand, is surprising, on the other level is not. The footage that we were getting during the first weeks and months from southern and eastern Ukraine, Russian-speaking areas with significant percent of Russians, people marching under Ukrainian banners, This is Enerhodar, another city of mixed population and so on and so forth. So there was this outrage. Who are you guys? Why did you come? What right do you have to be there, to tell us how to live? And this is on a certain level very Ukrainian thing. again, broadly speaking, culturally Ukrainian, we are deciding on our own what to do. Whatever disagreements we have, this is between us. But some sociologists are saying that there is one thing that is really very important that happened in the years leading to the all-out war was the reform of local administration in Ukraine, with much more resources going to the localities. People establishing much more close relation to the mayors. Mayors became the major target. The mayor of Enerhodar, this is his deputy. He was arrested. He was kidnapped. The mayor of Slavutich was kidnapped. And people were there to support, broadly speaking, democracy. In reality, the people whom they elected, they trusted. So that's one explanation. Another, what I can say after the start of the war and annexation of the Crimea in 2014, there is just enormous explosion of interest in Ukrainian history, in all things Ukrainian. So in these conditions of the war, people started to get interested in that. And I'm telling that I'm here on the firmer ground because I'm telling you about my own books that were translated into Ukrainian without any financial support. There was market to do that and to support also translation and publication and so on and so forth. And that's post-2014 phenomenon. So that's another contributing factor. But this is it's a big question of why non-ethnic Ukrainians, non-Ukrainian speakers with this background in the very, very Soviet, very imperial industry say no way. It is a good question. I don't think we have full answer to it.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thank you for an amazing lecture. It was very timely and a very moving one, obviously. But I wanted to go back to the methodological discussion that you had at the start of the lecture. Maybe it goes a little bit beyond what the topic was about. But I was wondering, you mentioned the advantages of using social media for historians to write history. But I was wondering what the disadvantages might be, because I feel like maybe while we are going into the future historians will have to rely on it a lot. So what did you have to take into account while working with these new sources for as a historian, and what the historians of the future will have to pay attention to?
Well, I was really excited to find something that I didn't have in my previous work. But you are asking absolutely good question that, again, as a historians, we're all trained how to, it's 19th century, maybe earlier than that, thing about the so-called critique of the sources. And you critique the sources, this is in the way of how authentic it is, whether it comes from a particular period, but also what the information is provided there. And the general recipe is that you check the sources, you critique them, you evaluate them by comparing to other sources. And I think no one just invented anything better than that. And whether it's print, whether it's folklore, or whether it's a social media post, I think that still applies. So the method would be still the same. And then they would be very useful in one, depending on what questions you're asking, and very, very problematic with others, right? I can just imagine I was working with 1930s materials, and Professor Weiner knows that, and these are the reports of NKVD, and they're telling about, okay, what the reaction is, the early pollsters, what is the population talking about, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact or something else. Okay, so you can get a repertoire of possible responses, but you don't know whether they were invented by the officer himself, who was running short, had to provide or file a report. If it reflected the reality, you can't put a percentage that 5% of the population or 95% of the population believed in that or didn't believe in that. So fantastic source on the surface, but the question that you ask of how many people actually liked the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and how many people disliked it, you will not get answer to that. So it's also every source has its limitations.
Sure.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm curious if you found, does the themes that you discovered within Chernobyl and Zaporizhia and the, I guess, response of the locals, does that seem to follow trends within the greater picture of, Ukraine's response to the war, or is there something unique about maybe the potential cataclysmic effects of something going wrong that they reacted differently than in other areas?
Yeah, it's on the one hand, it looks like I look at this research as I produced a microcosm, so of the first month and a half of the war, which for me helped to explain the pictures that I saw on TV coming from other places. So as I said, okay, Chernobyl is unique, but it also explained to me Kharkiv and Berdyansk and other places, which I didn't study in that detail. So I started to understand the people's thinking and mechanic and how they reacted. In terms of, the people behaving in other conditions, not the war. What this project allowed me to do, to compare the Chernobyl of '86 with Chernobyl of 2022. And what I found in common was actually the behavior of the personnel of the nuclear power plant. So there is I refer to that in the book. There is a new monument that was built on the entrance to the headquarters of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The guy's name was Lilushenko. He was an engineer, the first who died from the acute poisoning. So this is the guy who was there on the night of 1986. So he went there immediately after that, got significant level of irradiation, was admitted to the hospital, and then left the hospital and joined his crew at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and got more radiation and eventually died. So it's about basically responsibility, at least what I saw in that group, for that task of keep the place safety, responsibility for what they did or what they didn't, and the sense of camaraderie that you are together, you support your guys in this conditions. So that's probably from that particular research, that's what I saw. That was also a parallel, again, whether you can extrapolate that to other groups. But that group, it looks like in '86 and 2022, that was more or less the same code of honor that they were following, and deciding on their own what is good and what is bad. The important figure, Valentin Heiko, the head of the Ukrainian crew, he started to work at Chernobyl in 1987. And one of the reasons why he was actually talking to the generals and to the colonels and was not afraid of them, he despised them since 1987 and 1988. He saw how they were sending the young guys into the most dangerous places. He was talking to them. This is already in 2022. This is your responsibility. How you're going to sleep is that, to go to bed is that. So it's there are these links and connections on that level as well. So he probably would behave differently if he wouldn't go through 87.
It's probably appropriate to conclude with dignity and this kind of conduct. Thank you so much.